At this point, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Cecilia Rikap, who is an associate professor in economics and the head of research at University College London's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. She's also a tenured researcher of Argentina's National Research Council, CONICET, and an associate researcher at COSTECH Lab in the Université de Tecnologie de Compiègne. Cecilia's research is rooted in international political economy of science and technology and the economics of innovation. She currently studies the rising concentration of intangible assets, leading to the emergence of monopolies, among others in digital and pharmaceutical industries, the way in which intellectual rents are distributed, the resulting geopolitical tensions, and the effect of all of this on the knowledge commons and development. Her most recent work is exploring how intellectual monopolization hampers a just ecological transition, which is exactly what we would want to find out more about. So at this point, I will hand over to Cecilia. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sheen. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I will start by sharing my screen so that everyone can follow me with some slides. And the discussion today is about technology transfer, and precisely it's related to technology transfer to try to tackle or address the ecological breakdown. But there is something missing in between, which is the fact that we live under what I would describe as intellectual monopoly capitalism, which hampers, of course, the possibilities of sharing knowledge and building knowledge on the basis of that knowledge that is being shared, or actually the fact that it's not being shared. So why would we, perhaps you are all super familiarized with this discussion, but why would we think of digital technologies in relation to the ecological breakdown? Well, basically, there is a quite established already narrative, at least. We can discuss later on whether we believe it's true or not, but there is a quite established view on the fact that AI, or more broadly digital technologies, can play a crucial role in guiding us towards a more sustainable future. And even in Europe, there is this idea of the twin transition you may have heard of, where there is a lot of weight put on digital technologies to, again, drive the transition. But you know, this picture that is here on the back, not the one about the digital transition, the twin transition, but the one on the back comes from the environmental report of Google. And Google recently accused of being a monopoly, not only an intellectual monopoly, which is what I will argue today, but broadly a monopoly in its search engine and ads business. One would ask, why would Google or other companies like Amazon, Microsoft, why would they be so interested in the ecological transition? Why is this their business? And of course, the first answer will be because it's deeply the way in which this transition is being thought is a transition that is being driven, guided by these digital technologies. So to make sense of this that I have just claimed, and the fact that because these companies in particular and some others are concentrating the crucial intangibles, not only for the for the ecological transition, but widely, they're more and more advancing towards a scenario where only a few have the capacity to put all the different pieces of the knowledge puzzle together, a scenario where we cannot build new knowledge on the basis of existing knowledge because the gap in terms of learning becomes so wide that even if a company like Google would tomorrow open up its algorithms for most of the population, it would be completely incomprehensible. So why all this is relevant when we're thinking of addressing the ecological transition, and in particular, why is this also relevant for peripheral countries, which is where it is this transition, it's the most needed, because as we know, it's where most of the ecological disasters have been more concentrated. So for today, what I want to do is, in order to unpack what I have just said, I will briefly introduce you to this idea of intellectual monopolies. What do I mean when I say intellectual monopolies? Why is this different from other forms of monopoly, like the market monopoly, which is the one we are quite used to speak of? And then from there, I will give you some very brief empirics that give evidence on this claim, which is that artificial intelligence actually has been planned by Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. The digital technologies, the artificial intelligence that we have right now, not only generative AI, but AI, machine learning more broadly, is the result of the plan to develop this technology in certain ways to become ultimately the whole world dependent on Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and to a lesser extent dependent on Meta. And from there, I will argue also that these companies are not simply interested in the ecological transition, are not simply interested in seeing what they can sell, how they can make a business of the transition, but they are actually planning an ecological transition that suits them and that at the same time is a dead end for society. So I will end with why we think we need to go beyond the myth of technology as progress, technology as a form of solutionism that will guide us and solve all our problems, without at the same time saying that there is no role to play by technology or knowledge. There is a role, of course, that knowledge and technology can play, but we will always need to ask what knowledge, what technology, developed by whom, for what's the ultimate goal of this technology, and so on and so forth. So precisely, speaking about knowledge and technology, I want to give you my sort of ABC definition of the knowledge production network in capitalism. So when we think about producing knowledge, all forms of knowledge, from experiential knowledge to the most advanced science-based knowledge, in every case, we are always speaking of a co-production process, in the sense that this is never conducted by a single individual. This idea of Newton, Einstein, or like this myth also of the entrepreneurs, they are really just that, a myth. And the myth ends up making us ignore all the history of contributions and the fact that knowledge is produced at the intersection, in the collaboration, in the articulation between ideas that are put forward by different organizations, different institutions, people. However, what happens, and this is where we start moving from the co-production towards who profits, the first thing we need to distinguish is that in today's capitalism, it's very easy for some leading corporations to appropriate that knowledge, to deprive others, even others that contributed to producing that knowledge, from using the knowledge, from using and therefore further expanding that knowledge. And this is the process that we can call appropriation of knowledge. But still, I can appropriate knowledge and do nothing with it. Try to become rich, but if nobody's interested, innovation is a social relation, and I need someone to be interested in what I'm doing. If nobody's interested in the iPhone, then there will be no Apple. So basically, it's not just about appropriation, but it's also about turning appropriated knowledge, or even sometimes knowledge that is controlled but that is not appropriated, into an asset. And what I have just said may sound very confusing, but actually, if you think about the way in which big tech companies are using the open source environment more in general, and how they are putting part of their own software in open source to make these parts of their software become the norms of the industry, the standards of the industry, they formally do not own, let's say, Kubernetes or TensorFlow. These are different types of solutions that were, or technologies that were put in open source by Google. Once they are put in open source, Google doesn't own them in the legal sense, but can still profit from the fact that everyone is using Kubernetes or TensorFlow for developing their specific machine learning solutions, their specific AI models, and so on and so forth. So even sometimes without having the property over the knowledge, some companies can make money out of it. So the assetization is the way in which we refer to the monetization of the knowledge, because basically turning knowledge into an asset means that if I do it, I will be able to garner an intellectual rent over the years while I keep that asset, just because I'm depriving others from accessing it and I'm using it for productive purposes. So with this in mind, one can go and say, okay, but this process, in principle, can sound open to everyone. We co-produce knowledge all together, and then a random someone, can appropriate and monetize the knowledge. And that would be a bit of the idea behind the original Schumpeterian way of thinking about innovation with the entrepreneur. the entrepreneur as someone that randomly came out with an idea that here we are already challenging it by saying, okay, the idea was not from the entrepreneur, the idea was from a collective, but still we can say the entrepreneur is the one that has appropriated the idea and is making money out of it. But even in this idea of the entrepreneur, there was this sort of underlying mindset that was telling us that everyone could be an entrepreneur. However, what we are seeing more and more is the same companies that are continuously monopolizing intangibles, that are continuously transforming co-produced knowledge into their own intangible assets. And when I say knowledge, of course, I'm also including here data. And these companies are not only big tech companies, but all the leading corporations in the world actually are operating along the same lines. Big pharma companies do it. Leading manufacturing companies from Europe do it as well. Automobile industry leaders like Toyota or Renault, and you name it, they all operate as intellectual monopolies. And the same can be said of companies that operate franchising models, where the knowledge that is encapsulated, the intangible assets, are their brands. Like, for instance, McDonald's or Nestle or many others, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, you name it. So really, although today, the rest of my talk will just be about big tech, actually, when I'm thinking of intellectual monopolies, I'm thinking of companies that have this capacity to be constantly capturing more knowledge. It's not just a one-time innovator, but the same company, I'm sorry for the background noise, the same company that is capturing portions of knowledge and reinforcing its intellectual rents on the basis of capturing more and more knowledge as we speak. So basically, we see a transformation from what was supposed to be a temporary advantage, having an intellectual rent because you were at the frontier of knowledge. But as soon as there was a technology transfer, as soon as there was an imitation process, as soon as others innovated, there was supposed to be an elimination of that rent. And that's not happening because the same companies are the ones that are always leading, and the laggards are always the same ones. And the laggards become structurally subordinate companies. And this is why it's also different from a market monopoly. These companies, what they are monopolizing is knowledge, is data. And on the basis of this knowledge and data that they monopolize, they can concentrate a larger share of the market. But this larger share of the market doesn't mean that they will become the only ones. They can totally operate in concentrated markets. And sometimes what they also do is diversify. And Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are at the forefront in this diversification, not only concentrating some markets, but also entering multiple markets. And when we speak of the monopolization of knowledge, it's not just driven by intellectual property rights. For the sake of time, I will not discuss in detail this table, but basically it just shows you the leading organizations in terms of AI patenting. And you can clearly see that the first one is Toyota. And this is just to emphasize that if we go and just look at patents as an indicator, both of innovation, but also of intellectual monopolization, we will be getting a completely biased picture, because patents are only one of the many mechanisms of appropriation of knowledge. Knowledge is also kept secret. I was mentioning before Google algorithms, and that's kept secret. Big data are also kept secret. And it's also the speed of the innovation which contributes to keep these companies at the frontier. So let's go straight, and I can come back to a lot of reasons that explain why these companies are here and why now. And this is not just about, and not mainly about, their internal R&D capabilities. Part of their lead is explained by knowledge that is co-produced by many others, by universities, public research organizations, startup companies. They are all part of a sort of turbulent periphery, satellite organizations that produce pieces of knowledge that then the intellectual monopoly controls, puts the pieces together, and once the puzzle is ready, profits from that knowledge. This is important also because it directly speaks to why everyone is being robbed in the end, why intellectual monopolization is a form of, is a knowledge predatory practice. It's not just monopolizing the knowledge that was produced in-house, but also monopolized knowledge that was co-produced with many others. But it's not only about the knowledge itself, it's also about a lot of political, institutional transformations that enable the situation we currently live in. If I have to give you one snapshot that synthesizes all the reasons why today we see a society driven by intellectual monopolies, I would have to explain in detail all this slide, which I will not do it, again, for the sake of time and because I really want to speak about what all this has to do with the ecological breakdown, but just to say that I'm not just claiming that this is the outcome of how technologies evolved or how the production of knowledge is organized, but also there is a big responsibility in terms of the role of certain states, in particular, political, institutional transformations, as I was mentioning before, and also transformations in the technologies themselves. And I'm going to focus here 1 second, because AI is not simply a general purpose technology. AI is or it has been described as a method of invention. And why? Because think of chemistry or drug development, think of every discipline you can think of, even brand building, other things that are not science, new science, but are also forms of building intangible assets. More and more, all this is relying on one method, which is processing a lot of data with machine learning algorithms. And these algorithms, the machine learning algorithms, be them generative AI or not, so other deep learning or deep neural network algorithms, they all have in common that they get better the more data they process. And this means a sort of means of production that appreciates the more we use it instead of depreciating. And this generates a self-sustained advantage for those that have managed to encapsulate this frontier knowledge. This frontier knowledge, therefore, requires data, the code, but also requires computing power. AI wouldn't exist without the computing power. The computing power also encapsulates knowledge, of course, but it's not just about knowledge, it's not just in material, it's also about all the digital infrastructure required to process the algorithms with more and more data. So basically, as I anticipated, my main argument in relation to why these companies are controlling even the ecological transition is that they have control over the main technology that is now being used or is trying to be used to conduct the ecological transition. They control AI, and in particular, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft control the 3 parts. The weak part of Meta concerns the compute, the digital infrastructure. And why do I say this? So this is not the aim of the talk, so I will just be very brief here and say that this is the network of the main organizations presenting papers at the most important AI conferences in the world. They publish the papers together in co-authorships, so the links represent the most important co-authorships. And the 2 main nodes, the 2 main organizations of this network are, here you have Alphabet, and here you have Microsoft. Also, you have Facebook here in quite a central position, and Amazon is not so central in this data set in particular. This means that Microsoft and Google in particular are setting the frontier AI agenda. And it's not just setting the agenda, it's that then they afterwards are capable of appropriating this co-developed knowledge. How do they do it? Well, I mean, there are multiple mechanisms. Of course, a lot of things don't even go published, and they have a lot of non-disclosure agreements with the hundreds of scholars that work part-time with them. But one thing that we can look at to make sense of what I'm saying is a comparison between the share of co-authors and the share of co-owned patents. And here you have the data for Microsoft. In the last decade, more or less, Microsoft co-authored with another organization almost 90% of its papers, whereas co-owning patents, the share of patents that have at least one other co-owner was only 1%. So 90% versus 1%. So this is a clear evidence of knowledge appropriation. But one could still say, okay, with the coding, with the math, with the development of the model is not enough. We also need to code it. We also need to turn it into an actual model or an application of existing models. So one can go and look at AI startups. And very rapidly, we will verify that these companies are more and more relying on the venture capital money that is poured by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. These 3 companies together in 2023 poured 2/3 of all the money that funded, all the venture capital money that funded generative AI startups, just to give you one crucial piece of data. But besides this stylized fact, the logic goes way beyond the generative AI landscape. Here, the map is focused on who is funding AI startups. And you can see, for instance, Google with a very big triangle. These are the main funders of AI startups. And all the big tech companies are here on top of companies that are actually focused on venture capitalism, whereas Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Intel, and so on are not. Their business, in principle, is another one, not being a venture capitalist. And here you have some more data, but I want to focus on something, which is that part of all this money that in particular Amazon, Microsoft, and Google pour into the AI startup world goes in the form of cloud credits. This is not real money. This is just a compute voucher. This is just the possibility to use their cloud for free up to a certain amount of money. And once that ends, all the architecture, all the software will be already embedded into the solutions provided by one of these cloud giants. And therefore, it will be extremely expensive to live. It's a form of lock-in. It's a form of free entry, but impossible exit. And it's not just about the cloud, it's also about the fact that by putting money into these companies, the big tech companies get access to the knowledge that they are developing, and they also get the chance to steer the technologies that they are developing. The cloud is a highly concentrated market. And maybe you heard that the cloud, for instance, is responsible, like Google and Amazon's cloud are responsible for the technology provided to the Israeli government that is called Project Nimbus, which among others was aimed at generating facial recognition of Palestinians. And this is, of course, the forefront, the worst part of the story of the cloud. But underneath, it's not that we see better things. Actually, the cloud is a way to control every single organization. In the literature of economics of innovation, there is a clear understanding that there is a chance to learn by doing, using, and interacting. When someone adopts a technology, the process of adopting the technology requires adaptations. And in that process, new innovation is created. But there is no real technology transfer in the cloud. The only thing that happens is that organizations can purchase black boxes. The services are sold as black boxes with no access to the code. So there is no real access to any technology. It's just a way to further entrench the power of big tech companies. All the things that we've been discussing so far have a chapter in developing countries. And this chapter goes to many dimensions. It goes to also public science and technology knowledge appropriation, as I was describing before for the general picture. It also refers to acquisitions and processes of venture capital of firms in the peripheries. But there is also another thing, and I have 2 more slides and I will finish here. One is what I would describe as twin extractivism, because peripheral countries are investing in science and technology that then they can not use for their own technological progress, that they cannot use productively inside their countries, because that knowledge ends up being captured, appropriated by intellectual monopolies. That reproduces the historical logic in the independent countries, in peripheral countries, which is a logic where, because of unequal exchanges, the peripheral countries continue extracting nature and therefore further expand the ecological breakdown as a way to make ends meet, as a way to cope with their international accounts. And this is why we can speak of twin extractivism, because knowledge extractivism, data extractivism from peripheral countries then ends up reinforcing ecological extractivism or nature extractivism. And of course, part of this nature extractivism is also the minerals, is also the lithium, the cobalt, is also part of the material basis of digital technologies. But I said something else, which is that big tech companies are not simply making a business, for instance, selling AI models for sustainability. They are actually also, on the basis of this more absolute or general control that I've described so far, my understanding is that they are also, to some degree, planning a transition that suits them. There is no alternative besides the fact of accepting that the world is going to explode. than to accept that there will be a transition. And therefore, the question is what transition and who is capable of steering a transition that benefits itself instead of being a just transition for everyone. And there are three ways in which these companies are controlling this transition. One is because they have an approach that is a siloed approach. And it's a silo and business-friendly approach. For instance, Google has an estimate of the efficiency that Google Maps gives to routes for drivers. Yes, of course, but there is no discussion. One can say it's better if there is no waste because the drivers know exactly the shortest path to get wherever they are getting to. Instead of, and one could say, okay, this is good, but why is this problematic? This is problematic because instead of thinking collectively of reducing the use of cars and expanding the technologies and the use of public transport for everyone, good services for everyone, good public services in the public transport area for everyone, the discussion is about how to make the use of the car more efficient. And like this, there are plenty of examples that I can give you. Let me also say that these companies emphasize all the time that their cloud is more efficient in energy consumption and water consumption than private clouds, which would be the clouds of individual companies if they were not on a big tech cloud. But what they don't say is that because they are constantly encouraging, nudging companies to consume more artificial intelligence, to train more models, to consume more computing power, in the end, even if the individual consumption is more efficient, they end up generating an expansion of the consumption both of energy and water. And perhaps the most important part refers to techno-solutionism and the fact that even if we would have all the technologies needed for the transition, and even if big tech would offer all these technologies in their clouds, or even if they would offer them for free on their clouds, we're missing a big part of it, which is the political dimension. And with this, I want to finish just going back to things that we already know and wrapping up in relation to intellectual monopolies. The first one is that the development of technologies has also favored a process of disciplining labor, a process of controlling labor, applying the method of science to control and plan labor. And I highly recommend you Braverman for that. Another angle is the dependency theory and the things that we discussed so far in terms of how development has been conditioned by the monopoly of technology at the center. And what I have argued here today is also that part of the monopolized technologies were co-produced by organizations from the global south, but still these organizations cannot enjoy the associated benefits. And finally, under intellectual monopoly capitalism, one can say that this scenario prevents us from accessing crucial technologies. These companies are also shaping what technologies we have, and therefore the ones that we don't have. And they're also against any form of democratic effort to build technology for the people and planet, which is why if we want to think of technology transfer for the ecological transition, we need above all to terminate with intellectual monopolies. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. That was such a amazingly tour de force, rapid picture of so many of the issues involved. When we were talking about this session initially, we did say that we might have the speakers in the other order because Cecilia would introduce a complexification of some of the issues, and I see now what you were meaning. We have now been able to be joined also by our second speaker, who is Clovis Freire from UNCTAD. So I will hand over. Clovis Freire is the Chief of the Commodity Research and Analysis section within UNCTAD. Previously, he was the lead author of UNCTAD's Technology and Innovation Report. In his background, he is a computer engineer and an economist with a PhD in economics of innovation and technological change. He has over 21 years of experience working within the United Nations with a focus on economic diversification and structural transformation of developing countries. So, Clovis, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I was, unfortunately, I had to join a little bit late, but fortunately enough, I was able to pick up a little bit of the presentation of Cecilia. It was very good to hear that. Thank you very much. Well, I was asked to speak about one of the reports that we prepared here in UNCTAD, is the Technology Innovation Report 2023. So I will make the presentation of this report, and we can add other elements and facts in the Q&A and after that. Let me just share my presentation. So I hope you can see that. So basically this report, the topic was opening green windows of opportunities, technological opportunities for a low carbon world. It was a very much a segue of a previous report, 2021 Technology Innovation Report, where we look at frontier technologies, so robots, AI, IoT, and other technologies, and how the technologies could affect inequalities within and between countries. And on that, we identified that the issues of this green window for opportunities was very important to take a look, and that was the focus of this report in 2023. Basically, what I would like to start is with this image here, where it shows this very long term since before the Industrial Revolution. And then we have there in blue, we have the GDP per capita of countries at the core of the economic system, with basically Western Europe, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. And in green is the GDP per capita of the periphery countries, basically all the other rest. And in purple, we have the global average of CO2 per capita. And what this shows is that before the Industrial Revolution, the difference between GDP per capita of core countries and countries on the periphery of the rest of countries were not that big. There was a difference, but was not that big. And that over time, with every technological revolution, the difference between this GDP per capita of this group of countries only increased. So that even recently, this you see the recent pickup of the green line. That is quite a lot the history of China since 2000. And although in percentage terms, this difference between core countries and the rest has not increased, actually in percentage terms it decreased, but in absolute terms this number just has increased over time. So it shows that with every wave of technological revolution, the inequality between countries only increased. And now that we are talking about the beginning of a new technological revolution, the fourth technological revolution, or other scholars on this area of technological revolutions, like Carlota Perez, she sees more as if we are in the middle of the age of ICT, not at the beginning of a new one. But regardless if it's a new wave starting off, we in the middle of the age of ICT, the fact is that we are in the middle of this technological revolution, and now with green and digital transitions, that is basically this intertwined revolution with green and green and digital technology, that would be there is the risk that developing countries get further behind again. And what is it shows that also there is this component of the CO2 per capita that also have been increasing with each one of the technological revolutions. There is a great opportunity for developing countries with these green frontier technologies. We have I estimate that the market size in 2020 of those was like 1.5 trillion, and by 2030 could go to 9.5 trillion when we put together the digital and the green technologies that we have covered in this report. These numbers are outdated, but so this is even bigger today. But so far, developed economies have been taking most of the opportunities. So if we compare, for example, exports of green technologies by developed countries in 2018 was about 60 billion, and developing countries, including China, was like 57 billion. And when we go to 2021, that was developing countries' exports also increased, went to 75 billion. That includes China. But developed countries' exports increased much more. It's going to 156 billion. So really clearly developed economies were able to get more of most of these opportunities. Here, just an example: exports of electric vehicles and how uh, for different years how that was the case for German, US, and China. But German, US at the top there. Of course, China is a big story on the frontier technologies. They dominate quite a lot of the indicators in terms of publications, patents, exports, uh, and actually in Industry 4.0 technology, even more than this, much more than the US on that. The trade on green technology has expanded on the past year. So just to give an idea here how it looks like, and for solar PV, in the case of solar PV, China is indisputably the big exporter of that. So in this report, what we were looking for was like, what could be the paths for developing countries really to benefit from this technological revolution? And we look at three different paths for that. One is development in using renewable energy technology. So not only using, but developing these technologies as well. So this one path. The second one, greening traditional global value chains by using more digital technologies. So you can think about global value chains of textile, garment, mining, other things that could be somehow green through using this technology, and that could be an opportunity for these countries that are taking part of these global value chains. And the third one was if these countries could diversify their economies towards products and sectors, like production sectors that are both more complex and greener. So using this framework of economic complexity, where a product is more complex, meaning basically is a proxy to how much productive capacity or capabilities or technologies in a broader term in terms of capital embody and labor embody technology or embody infrastructure and so on, how these capabilities, how many of those are required to produce a product. So the most capabilities you need to produce something, the more complex is this product. So what are if developing countries, they diversify the economies toward these more complex products and that are also green, associated with lower carbon emissions. So that's another path that we consider. So if you look at the first one, what we saw is that it's if we think about how countries are ready, so readiness of countries and the response that countries make, what we see is that for sure countries that have a better initial condition, so in terms of readiness, and that have strong response, they make the best scenario in terms of sizing this green window of opportunities. But what we also see, and there are many examples of that, like solar PV in China, for example, bioethanol in Brazil, in Chile, hydrogen as a potential. But in terms of uh, examples, we saw that even when countries, they don't have strong initial conditions, they can, by using very strong responses, policy response, they really can benefit quite a lot. So these are the windows within reach of countries. And then we see some examples here: biomass in Thailand, Vietnam, hydrogen in potential in Namibia. So these are potential areas there. The another thing that we analyze is that a lot of the barriers for newcomers in this sector it's also related to the maturity of this technology. So here we try to measure what would be a proxy of patent maturity, meaning basically the difference between the year that the patent was in place and the 20 most cited patents between 2000 and 2021. So, and the idea is that we have the patents that are more technology that are more mature. They they give a little bit more. They facilitate, for example, the understanding of this technology and how this technology is involved. So in a way, it may facilitate the newcomers to get into some of these areas. The other thing that we look at is the tradability of these technologies. So like capital equipment as input for the technology, in terms of energy generation of this technology, in terms of also the energy outputs of that technology. So if you take a look, for example, solar PV, the tradability of the capital equipment of inputs to produce the technology, the solar panels, could be industrial robots, assembly line designs. This is highly tradable. Also, the technology to generate the energy, like the solar PV panels, they are highly tradable, and electricity is medium tradable. But there are other types of technology that the capital equipment, the energy generation technology, they are less tradable. They require a lot of based on the specificities of the place and what is used as a medium there, and is less tradable. So the level of tradability also influences both the competitive dynamics and the modes of learning, because if something is very tradable, you can just import that technology and without really a lot of opportunities for learning. But if it's something that you have really to requires quite a lot of knowledge and information from the ground on what is in the location there, you have more opportunities for learning on this process. In terms of trade policies that have been used for these green technologies, we see that there are a lot of policies to support. Many countries have used it, the local content requirements. We have several examples: China, South Africa, India, Morocco, Brazil, Canada, Spain. We have favorable customs duties, export credit assistance, and then several other incentives that are in place, not necessarily trade related. The second part that I mentioned to you is that we look at this greening of the traditional value chain, and we saw that indeed, of course, the technology can help quite a lot in reducing the carbon emissions, either capturing data using online connected sensors and so on, or smart manufacturing. And one element that is very important in this whole area is these voluntary sustainability standards that are used to help to upgrade the value chains. That they could be a driver for this upgrade. using technology to comply with the voluntary sustainability standards. But also we have to understand quite a lot of the governance of these value chains to understand if the power dynamics will not put players in developing countries in weak positions, being forced to comply with some of these standards and incurring quite a lot of costs, and being that the only option for them, otherwise they cannot even be participating of the value chain. So these are the elements that we have to take in consideration there. And when we look at the diversifying towards more complex and greener production, what we saw and that we try to show in this graph, for example, here we have in the horizontal axis, we have the average product complexity of different industries, and we see that so if these are higher, the average is more complex, is the mean that industry, it requires more capabilities to produce those products, more technology to produce those products. So technology in a broader sense, and considering the whole value chain from the raw material until the production. So that would require more capabilities to be produced. And what we see is that the more complex the industry, the higher the average carbon emissions associated with that production. So which is not really great, because that kind of shows that if you, on average, if you move to something that is more complex, is also more carbon intensive. But we found in each one of these different industries, we found the particular products that are more complex and have not a big increase on carbon emissions per capita. Maybe not a decrease, but not an increase on carbon emissions per capita associated with that production. So those products in different sectors could provide a path for diversification that is both more complex and greener. But that would require a very strategic approach by countries to do that. So it's not only very horizontal kind of policies, it really require industrial policy that is very targeted in particular products and be going more deeper than particular sectors. So particular products that have this combination of more complex and more and less carbon intensive. What we found that is a challenge for developing countries is, for most of developing countries, is the low level of the existing technological and innovative capacities. So if we look at high skills and technology intensive manufacturing sectors, the percentage of total exports of countries, so which give countries the opportunity to work on those technologies, and a lot of those sectors are the ones that will adopt first these frontier technologies. And if we look at the high skill employment as a percentage of total working population, so countries that have both of these indicators are high, they have high opportunities and high skills. So high opportunities to apply these new technologies and high skills that will give them a very good advantage. Majority of countries, developing countries, are here, low opportunities and low skills. So that's a big challenge for developing countries. In terms of domestic policies, what it's in summary would suggest is really to set this direction towards green technologies innovation. So to do that, for countries to take this opportunity of the green technology innovation from the digital and green transformation to really try to push their development and catch up. So to do that, they'll need to align the environmental and industrial policies, invest in more complex and greener sectors, to have incentives and infrastructure to shift the demand for this production as well. A lot of this is related to setting the direction. So as I mentioned, to have a clear idea of products, not only broad sectors, but products that could be used. To build this green, productive, innovative capacity, you need to invest in R&D, raise awareness of green technology, develop digital infrastructure and skills, and so on. But in terms of how easy it is for countries to do that based on the um, global trade systems that we have and the international cooperation, the kinds of things that we have, what is clear is that countries to do that, they will have to promote sectors that don't exist yet on the economy, promote the production of products that they don't produce yet. So a lot of this is industrial policy promoting diversification in new sectors. So there's a lot of this infant protection required to make this work. And there has to be some consistency between the international agreements on trade, intellectual property from one side, and from climate change and from the other side, because we have the countries, developed and developing countries, they have agreed with the climate change agenda. So consider that, of course, it's very important to reduce carbon emissions. And for that, the countries have to participate on this energy transition and participate not only as users, but as producers of these technologies as well. And that, as I said, is required industrial policy, a lot of infant protection kind of policies. And when we look at the trade regime, there are some special treatment within that the trade regime, but usually they are very static in nature. They don't consider that you can justify some kind of special treatment because of a long-term issue that is the development of industry that you still don't have in your country. So that long-term view of and dynamic view of innovation that you create in diversifying the economy is not is recognized. So that there should be some way to align and bring consistency between the international trade system and the climate agenda. So in a way, the trade rules should permit developing countries to protect their infant green industry through tariffs, subsidies, public procurement, if we are really serious about the energy transition, having that as the goal of energy transition. But then now, how to make this align with the trade rules that in some cases would really require member countries to look at this problem and consider how to make perhaps the rules fit for purpose on this sense. And in terms of intellectual property as well, it should have greater flexibility for developing countries. For developing countries, particularly that are less diversified, that they don't have, we have most of the developing countries, actually 95 developing countries today can be classified as commodity dependent, relying over 60% of the exports on raw materials. So developing countries that are less diversified, they really have to have greater flexibility in regards to these to intellectual property and green technologies and so on. So I think I will finish here, and look forward to questions and discussions.